Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to AVPN's first South Asia Impact Capital Festival. I'm Sangeeta Watson, Senior Product Associate with the Knowledge and Insights team at AVPN, and I'm so glad that you've been able to join us on day 2 of Climate Week and hear from innovators who are mobilizing capital to respond to the growing climate concerns in South Asia. For those of you who do not know about AVPN, we are a network of funders and resource providers with over 600 members across 32 markets. Our mission is to move more capital towards impact in Asia by providing social investors like yourselves with opportunities to connect with key stakeholders across various sectors and markets, to learn from one another, and to find opportunities for action. We are also sharing highlights of our day live on Twitter, so don't forget to share your experience with us by using the hashtags AVPN South Asia 2021 and hashtag social impact. Over the month of February, this festival has been spotlighting best practices and solutions that AVPN members are delivering across India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka in addressing issues ranging from healthcare, livelihoods, climate action, and education, all of which are urgent matters for the sub-region today. Before moving to the program proper, a few housekeeping announcements. To download any session resources, please click on the download icon on the agenda page, which is next to the session title. To continue chatting with your speakers and fellow delegates in this session, please make full use of the messaging function or the event feed in the platform. Finally, please note that this session will be recorded and you'll be able to access the recordings for 3 weeks after the festival. This week, the festival focuses on climate. For today's opening session, we will hear from the Rockefeller Foundation on how it aims to unpack the challenges in integrating climate action into the energy poverty agenda. It does this by adopting an investment lens in view of a much-needed equitable economic recovery from COVID-19. To kick off this conversation, I would like to introduce you to the moderator for this session, Pat Hsien Loh, Chief of Staff and Policy Advisor at AVPN. Over to you, Pat.
Thank you very much, Sangeeta. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our friends that are logging on today. Welcome to our fireside chat session. And to get us going, I'd like to just take a couple of minutes to set the context about inclusive recovery from COVID-19 in view of this week's topic. So post-pandemic, it is estimated that close to 700 million people will be drawn back into extreme poverty by 2050 if climate impact is not addressed and mitigated. So in building a just and equitable recovery from the pandemic, it is critical to understand the impact of climate resilience and accounting for these capabilities amongst the most vulnerable and disadvantaged. We want to consider how will green recovery from the pandemic address climate resilience. We're thinking also about the implications of investing in clean energy to a just and equitable recovery. And lastly, we also want to make sure that we understand the opportunities for multi-sector collaboration across a variety of impact capital stakeholders to achieve this outcome. So today we will hear from the Rockefeller Foundation, who has been quite cognizant of the investment gap in funding and enabling access to clean energy, and has demonstrated this commitment through significant financial and non-financial resources invested in the microgrids and distributed renewable energy work in South Asia through its Power initiative. So far be it for me to speak too much about that, because today we have Mr. Joseph Curtin, the Director of the Power and Climate Initiative at the Rockefeller Foundation, to tell us more and build on this work, highlighting the challenges, successes, and opportunities in addressing the intersection between rising temperatures and rising inequality. So welcome, Joseph, and it's very nice to have you with us today, bright and early from New York.
Good morning, Patsy, and a pleasure to join you, and delighted to be here on Climate Week.
So I think, you know, as I had set the stage earlier, and I think you are a well-versed expert in this topic. From where you are sitting, Joseph, in Rockefeller Foundation, having the global view, tell us a little bit about where you think we are currently in ensuring a, quote, just and equitable recovery, and what are the implications as you see it about how climate resilience will play a role in building back from the pandemic?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to start just with a reminder of just how singular and unique this moment is for the global economy and for people around the world. You know, the World Bank has said that this coronavirus pandemic has caused perhaps the biggest shock to the global economy since the Second World War. And the IMF have estimated that tens of trillions of dollars will be stripped from global output by the end of this year. And the response has been pretty in keeping with the scale of this challenge. $12 trillion have been announced in terms of fiscal stimulus packages around the world. Central banks have announced another 7.5 billion or 7.5 trillion in expanded balance sheets. But in my view, there's three major problems with the response so far. So first of all, equity. Many middle and low income countries have inadequate social safety nets, they have limited fiscal space, and the IMF have estimated that low and middle income countries have only been able to stimulate their economies about a quarter of the level provided by wealthier countries in terms of a percentage of GDP. And so I suppose the first danger is that current inequalities globally, both within countries and between countries, will be exacerbated by the current crisis if we don't do something differently. And the second point that I would make is that there's a lot of evidence from past crises and from the economic literature that a rising tide really lifts all boats, and that an internationally coordinated response, therefore, will deliver a bigger bang for our buck, by creating positive spillovers, be they in terms of global public goods or trade or growth or stability, and all countries can benefit from these positive spillovers. But the problem is that, we've seen a very nationally dominated approach with minimal coordination, and the role of the G20 or the G7 or the UN, these multilateral bodies, has been very marginal. And then last, and I suppose the issue that will be of most interest to your audience is that, this opportunity, this recovery period, the International Energy Agency has stated this presents the last opportunity for us to address climate change and to really dramatically change global investment trends. But OECD and others have pointed out that actually, if you look at the fiscal stimulus packages that are on the table, they haven't really, in many cases, favored green investments over brown and traditional investments. So to summarize, there's been a big response, but it has been unequal, it has been uncoordinated, and it hasn't been very green. But I would just lastly like to end on a more positive note. I think that there is political momentum building for a new approach. And, to pick some examples from Asia, as we know, China set its net zero target fairly recently, even if we must wait for the 5-year plan to see how that plays out in practice. Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, Bangladesh have all announced major U-turns on coal plants in development recently. A reduction from 125 gigawatts planned 5 years ago, an 80% reduction already. And we see a similar U-turn on coal in India, where planned coal projects have fallen to 30 gigawatts in the pipeline compared to 250 gigawatts in 2015. And on the other side of the coin, we see from a financing perspective, the traditional financiers in Asia, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, the financial institutions in those countries are under major pressure to discontinue financing coal. And in fact, many of the largest financial institutions have already announced U-turns. So there are these really positive stories in Asia, and these are matched, I would say, globally. So the incoming Biden administration has put a really strong foot forward on climate change. I would direct people to the executive order that was announced a couple of weeks ago, which is really sort of dramatic stuff. The EU's Green New Deal, I would say, sort of provides a template for what could be achieved globally. So it's a 30% commitment that all new stimulus spending, hundreds of billions of dollars, will go to green investments. It's a commitment that there will be solidarity between member states. So weak member states like Greece, for example, will be supported by strong member states. And there's a do no harm threshold for the remainder of the package that isn't green. It has to prove that it can do no harm. And so to conclude, will be watching key moments throughout this year for signs of political momentum that these green shoots will really be kind of, will really grow. For example, at the G20 in particular, I think at the end of the year will be a key moment. And of course, COP26. And I hope we will see a resurgence of multilateralism and a renewed commitment to tackle climate change.
Thanks very much, Joseph. And I think it's very optimistic to hear about these green shoots, as we call them. And particularly knowing that much of this is also happening in this region, in our part of the world. I do want to pick up on a point that you mentioned earlier, and it struck me when you mentioned about the risk and still the potential for the response nationally and internationally to be unequal and uncoordinated, particularly when we're talking about the stark difference between how the stimulus are advancing the economic recovery between poorer countries compared to richer countries. Well, we mentioned 1/4 of the potential as opposed to among poorer countries rather than compared to the richer ones. So I want to pick up the point about the inequality with you. What are the implications, Joseph, for what this means with respect to the vulnerable and disadvantaged having access to very critical resources like clean energy, and what are the implications about how the foundation's work in climate, in energy access, is trying to resolve some of these challenges already in inequality to energy access?
Yeah, this is, as you know, Patsy, and one of the key areas of focus of the foundation. So, you know, from our view, power and access to clean, reliable, modern power is an indispensable aspect of modern life. It opens up the door of opportunity into the modern economy, has the potential to do so for billions of people. And in fact, nothing is more predictive of extreme poverty than lack of access to electricity. And it's for this reason that the International Energy Agency and others have described energy access, excuse me, it's very early here, as a golden thread that weaves together economic growth, human development, human sustainability. And traditionally, the Rockefeller Foundation and other donors and philanthropists and activists, leaders in this space, have focused especially on the 800 million people who have no access whatsoever to electricity. But 600 million of these live in sub-Saharan Africa and mostly in rural communities. But we've begun to broaden this focus in the foundation, in our thinking. We're at the kind of early stages of this journey because we've realized that just because you have access to electricity does not mean that you do not suffer from energy poverty. And we think a useful benchmark, a useful way of thinking about energy poverty is, you know, to achieve middle income status, a country needs to have power usage of approximately 1,000 kilowatt hours per annum. That's across the entire economy, you know, the total energy usage divided by the amount of people. So it's a very rough measure. But when we use this threshold or this measure, we estimate that almost half the world's population actually still live in energy poverty, almost 3.4 million people. 1.5 billion people have unreliable or unstable access. Their connection is unstable. Another 1.3 million people actually have reliable access, but they just can't afford to use that power. And the majority of these people live in Asia, not Africa. And the majority actually live in cities. So it changes the picture completely when you think about energy poverty rather than energy access, which is something that we have started to do. And just to add to that, we, again, as you mentioned, think that one of the really amazing opportunities for meeting this growing energy demand is around distributed renewables. Of course, we believe in clean energy from all sources, industrial scale renewables and others, but we believe that distributed renewables is perhaps the most underlooked and underinvested sector from a variety of reasons. And in actual fact, this is $1 trillion market between now and 2030, we think. It could save billions of tons of CO2 and deliver enormous resilience benefits, which I won't go into now, but I think that this resilience aspect of distributed renewable, building a power system around distributed renewables is incredibly important. And so this is, I would say, there is a widespread awareness in the community that we move in, that this is a really kind of amazing option, often the least cost option to address energy poverty in a climate protective way. But investment flows are really minuscule still compared to their potential. And I suppose that is the Foundation's mission. You know, that is really, or sorry, not the Foundation's mission, but especially in my part of the Foundation, the Parent Climate Team, is to address these barriers to investment in DREs globally and to help distributed renewable energies achieve their potential.
Thanks, Joseph. And I'm really struck by your distinction between energy access versus energy poverty, because the implication behind that is that it's not only just being able to have access to it, but also that it is coming from a place of environmental friendliness and clean energy that is made available, but also that it is able to support lives and support communities and what they need to do on an ongoing basis to come through recovering from the pandemic. And you know, I have those figures noted down here that 1.5 billion getting access to unstable energy and 1.3 billion who don't have affordable energy. And I think that that's remarkable in terms of what is the potential for impact for capital to move in that direction. But coming back to your point earlier also that you noted the majority of the population currently suffering from energy poverty are in Asia. Tell us a little bit more about what are some of the upcoming work and outlook that you have for the work in DREs and addressing energy poverty in Asia.
Yeah, in fact, we started our work in this area that I've just described in Asia, particularly in 2 markets. And you know, this investment portfolio is overseen by colleagues like Parathan in our Asia office, who has very kindly given me a kind of a run through of our main investment you know, story in the region, which, you know, we're all very proud of in the Foundation. And so the 2 markets that have been our main markets are Myanmar, which has one of the lowest rates of electricity access, approximately 50% in the region, and India, which is actually on track to achieve universal access, but like I said, has a huge reliability problem, a huge energy poverty problem, and has a huge problem in terms of you know, electricity for productive uses that can drive economic growth and drive economic development and drive economic opportunity. So 2 very different markets. Starting with Myanmar, the World Bank and other donors are very active in Myanmar, providing capital and subsidy capital, which is still incredibly important in the sector. So the Foundation has sought to deploy its capital in a very catalytic way, mostly focused on mobilizing local lenders and increasing the confidence of local lenders in this sector. Because private capital, even though there is subsidy capital available from donors, private capital is still required, often in the form of bridging loans, to ensure that projects succeed. And this is where the Foundation has mostly intervened in the market. And right now there are some 40 mini grids have been deployed in Myanmar to date. And the Rockefeller Foundation is also focused on providing technical assistance to ensure that the performance, the risks associated with the mini grid business model are understood. And our overall objective, I would say, in Myanmar is to demonstrate that mini grids are a viable business model and that local lenders can have confidence in terms of lending into project developers and project development companies and initiatives. India is a very different story. So the Rockefeller Foundation has directly supported ESCOs, energy service companies that are developing mini grids. OMC and Husk are the 2 companies that we've invested in. But in 2019, we launched a very exciting collaboration with Tata Power, and this is called TP Renewable Microgrid Limited. And this aims to be the largest mini grid company in the world, so a very exciting opportunity for us, serving up to 25 million people, 5 million households, and they aim ultimately to build 10,000 mini grids in rural India. And so far, this initiative has commissioned 127 plants, so a very small proportion of the overall target. Customers are shops, micro enterprises, residential users, productive use customers, such as irrigation and flour mills. And this latter category, productive use customers, we think is particularly important in the India context. So the pace of deployment is approximately 11.5 plants per month. So very rapid deployment. And one of the really exciting things, Patsy, and which you alluded to previously, was the speed that these projects can be deployed. So in terms of providing a response to the current downturn, this is a really quick way of deploying capital and building infrastructure. And we're seeing that unfold in India. So very different kind of strategy for the foundation in these two very different contexts.
It's interesting that you're bringing up the contrast here because the difference between trying to cultivate more local sources of private capital and the moves that the foundation have taken to address some of the perceived risk so that we can encourage more private sector participation in Myanmar as compared to a major private sector partner like Tata Power in India. But I am still interested, particularly though, since we're talking about the South Asia Impact Capital Festival, about how between these two markets, what are some of the insights you may have about engaging private sector capital? But I'd like to maybe just frame that question a little bit differently to you. Between Myanmar and India, quite clearly, in order to roll out the kinds of mini-grid outreach and development of this scale, it's necessary and critical to have the partnership of multiple sectors, including governments, as well as public and private sector partners. I'd like to hear a little bit from you, Joseph, just between what you've learned now between Myanmar and India, what are some of the opportunities that you see from multi-sector collaboration to really advance this work in South Asia? In particular, if we're talking about collaborations from a variety of players, whether it's power company, private sector companies, or even other forms of investors or funders. Love to hear more from you, Joseph, about that as well.
Yeah, I'm very struck by the need for, to bring new people to the table. And, one, I guess, example would be from our own growth in the Rockefeller Foundation. So the energy access community is quite a small and discrete community, a group of, investors, donors, philanthropists, and providers of capital who very much stick together. And then the climate community, which is actually the side of the house that I come from, is another discrete community. And one of the things that we did in the foundation last year in terms of developing this kind of broader community of actors is to bring together our power and our climate teams within the foundation. Because I think that there is an enormous potential to, really conjoin these two agendas. And, when the International Energy Agency looked at this overall agenda in a more holistic way, so delivering SDG 7, universal electricity access, substantially reducing air pollution and taking action to combat climate change, they estimated that $1 trillion of investment would be required per annum over the next 20 years. So this would be a doubling of investment in power generation from about 300 to 600 billion per annum. And another 520 billion would be needed to fund transmission and distribution infrastructure. So I guess what I wanted to communicate is this is an enormous market. And within that, just if we take out the kind of energy access component, our own analysis and modeling work, which is the part of our portfolio, which I'm particularly responsible for, suggests that this is a $100 billion per annum market opportunity. So like you said, that kind of capital cannot come from philanthropy. It cannot come from donor capital. It's absolutely essential that we leverage new players, traditional capital providers into the sector. And I guess that's really has been our experience, that you really need to kind of have a capital stack. You need to use philanthropic capital in an extremely catalytic way to get to that kind of scale. And I think if we do that, and if we continue to do that, and we build momentum in this market, we have a huge potential to drive down technology costs. So the technology costs are often far more expensive in less developed countries, but not just that, the finance costs, the cost of capital are orders of magnitude higher in some of these marginal geographies compared to what they would be in, let's say, Denmark. So there is enormous potential if we can bring these kind of donors together, if we can achieve scale to drive down costs, and in turn that will achieve, so it will create this kind of virtuous cycle.
I think that's a wonderful note to wrap up our conversation today, Joseph, because when I think about the kinds of audience that are listening to us right now, as well as the opportunity, as you say, to converge energy access, addressing energy poverty together with climate action, we are taking this opportunity to also unlock a whole community of potential funders and actors that may not previously have looked at this agenda before. So maybe your small, discrete group of interested players are going to grow very quickly after this conversation. But absolutely to invite this diverse group of players to now see the 100 billion per annum opportunity as being where they can potentially create impact by reducing, as you say, cost to market and also achieving scale is a great way for us to conclude this conversation. So Joseph, one last brief remark from you and we'll have to say goodbye to our audience. Any last words you'd like to share?
Just to say that this is a very, challenging market. Progress is slow, but the foundation, has been doing this work for 10 years. And this year we announced that we will be massively scaling up our commitment to this work. So the foundation has raised for the first time $1 billion on, by issuing bonds. And a very substantial proportion of this finance will go into launching a new global platform to end energy poverty with clean energy. And we hope to launch this new platform sometime in the coming 6 to 9 months. So it's a very exciting time for the foundation, and we're very dedicated to this work and this space. And we would encourage, other partners to work with us to achieve the potential of distributed renewables in this sector. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise, Joseph, a wonderful way for us to start off Climate Day as well today. So thank you very much for your time. And we are also delighted to have the audience with us thus far. Thank you so much for your attention. And I'd like to say goodbye now and turn it back to our MC. Thank you.
We have now come to the end of the Fireside Chat. This session is made possible with the kind support of our festival partners, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Sesame Workshop India, the Rockefeller Foundation, #COVID Action Collab, VNV Advisory Services LLP, the British Asian Trust, WPP India CSR Foundation, Catalyst Management Services Private Limited, and Satwa. To continue chatting with the speakers and your fellow delegates in this session, please make full use of the messaging and meeting function of our festival platform. Do share your highlights from this session on social media and remember to tag us using the hashtag AVPN South Asia 2021 and hashtag social impact. Up next is the grandstand on climate action, which will be starting at 4:25 p.m. India Standard Time. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.